Hello, you're listening to a sermon from Community Church in Prague, Oklahoma. At Community Church, we are all about loving God as a community and loving people in our community. If you live in the area, we would love for you to join us on a Sunday morning for coffee and fellowship at 9:30 or for service at 10 a.m. And now here is our pastor, Wopsle, with part 2 of our Summer Genesis series.
One of the most important things we talked about back in Genesis is the more we understand creation, then the more we understand the Creator, right? If we study the creation, then we understand God better. And the more that we understand God, well, we are made in the image of God. So we can actually understand God ourselves better by understanding God better as we understand creation better. Right? It's all a journey to understanding who we truly are created to be. And here's what I believe is if we can study God and understand God better, and if we can stop believing lies about God, then maybe we can stop believing lies about ourselves. It's a big part of what we were trying to do then. But now here we are in last week we did chapter 12, and we really honed in on Abram. And sure, we see how God interacts with Abram, but this is a little bit more of, we talked last week about some of the things we're gonna learn are prescriptive. Hey, Abram did this, and so I should live this way. It's like it's a prescription that God gives us through his word, and other parts that we're gonna read in Genesis are descriptive. Here's what happened there, and here's how it went, and now what can we learn from that? Not that I should do that, but maybe it tells us what we should stay away from. Remember last week with Abram too, we talked about him, we saw his faith kind of increasing, and we saw where in chapter 11, where they were building towers to make great names for themselves and cities so that they could just stay put and be comfortable. Well, we saw Abram last week building tents to stay mobile and altars to bring God glory instead. That's the kind of man we're talking about. So I love that Abram, he's so beautifully faithful to God throughout Genesis. And he's also just a big old idiot half the time too, right? We also saw last week that he lied about his wife, who she was, and his relationship to her. So it's like he's awesome and he's an idiot. He's just like me. I love him, right? I feel so at home studying Abram and seeing him do great one second and do something totally stupid the next. So I think what we're going to learn today as we say Abram, though, I think he's quick to learn. And if you're someone that makes mistakes like me, I say, hey, that's great, but you've also got to be quick to learn and to listen to God. Because I hope that I don't try to do things that God doesn't want me to do. But it's comforting to know that when I do things that God doesn't want me to do, he's big enough to stop me, redirect me, and put me back on the right path. But I have to be willing to listen to do that. So we're going to see Abram being willing to listen and do that this week. So Genesis 13 is where we're going to start here in verse 1, where all good things start. We'll read all of 13, then we'll skip around a little bit through 14, but this is what it says. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Let's pause there for just a second, remind you who Lot is, because he's very important for today. So Lot is Abram's nephew, and so he is Abram's brother's son. Well, that brother has died. And so you might be saying, well, hey, Lot just needed somebody in his life. And so he hanging out with Abram. What a good man Abram is to keep Lot with him. But remember we talked about last week, it isn't very cool of Abram because Abram left his father's household and left his inheritance, left everything he knew to follow God. Now, good for him, but there was another brother back here in his father's household. So it actually would have been better for Lot to stay with that other brother and have the inheritance, right? Everything was actually better for him back here at home. It was a little bit self-seeking for Abram to bring Lot along with him because we've already learned that Abram and his wife Sarai can't have kids, but yet God's given him this promise about his offspring and all this kind of stuff. And so we see here Abram kind of making this connection of, I need to have offspring to get this promise of God, but we can't have kids, so maybe my brother's kid will fulfill that spot. And so he's actually brought along Lot along with him in order to fulfill the spot of an heir that he can't have on his own. If you don't believe me, we're going to unpack that and see in Scripture how evident that is after several things. But that's kind of the premise that we're here with is the Bible keeps on pointing out that Lot is with him. And he's got lots of family with him, right? Probably maybe lots of people at least with him. So why is Lot with him? Well, because Lot is with him because that's his plan. That's Abram's plan for how God is going to move the story forward. So that's who he is. Verse 2, let's keep going. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, where he had first built an altar to the Lord. There, Abram called on the name of the Lord. So here again, we see Abram continuing to be this worshipful guy, giving it up for the Lord, giving honor where it is due. He's doing a pretty good job. Verse 5. Now, Lot, in parentheses, on the other hand, you're going to see he's not doing so good, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at the time. It's kind of an aside, not important for us this morning. So here we see, right, we've kind of established Abram brought Lot along because he needed to have a plan for how God was going to do what God said he was going to do. So Lot is that plan. And he brings them along, but now they're fighting, right? There's not enough space out here to hold them both, and Lot's kind of fighting back against him. And so I wonder, what is this man who we saw make a mistake back in 12, right? Lied about his wife. Now here in this chapter, what is he going to do when he's faced with the way that I thought God was going to move the story forward? Now we're fighting. He's still the man. He's still the big dog, right? So he could just say like, hey, deal with it, or give me your herds so I can take care of them and you just submit. What is Abram going to do when his plan seems to be kind of challenged a little bit, right, by Lot? Well, I told you he's growing. Let's see what he does in the next verse. Verse 8 says, so Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Just an aside there, this is not a part of the test, but that close relatives word there, your translation may say brothers. Most translations say that brothers. He's actually doing a similar thing here that he did last chapter with his wife. Back then it said sister, but the word there was really more like a close relative. So what he's done is he's kind of trying, last chapter, he was trying to be ambiguous. He was lying, but he was kind of trying to leave, is your wife your close relative? I mean, yeah, I guess it's your spouse, right? Of course. So he's kind of trying to leave this gray area, hoping that within that gray area, he can flourish. And so now here is again, your translations may say brother. Is Lot his brother? No. Lot's his nephew. So why wouldn't he just say, you're my nephew? He says this close relative because even in the way that he thinks maybe God is going to work this out, he's trying to leave this ambiguity. Like if you squint hard enough, you could see how Lot could be the answer and the heir to all this. So here again, we kind of see Abram doing a little bit of the same dance he did last chapter. Let me be ambiguous with the relationships of these people around me so that maybe God will do things the way that I see him doing them. But luckily, he doesn't hold on to it because he keeps on going. He says, we are close relatives. He says, is not the whole land before you? Like, look how big this place is. Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. And if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan towards Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. A little foreshadowing. It's going to come up really important today. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. So the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So let's start with Abram in this little part of the story, right? It seems like he's growing. He has this plan. It involves Lot. They get to fighting. And not only does he say, hey, it's okay, Lot, like I release you if you leave, he gives Lot the upper hand. You choose whichever way you want to go. You do whatever it is, however it is that you want to do it, and I will go the other way. He puts all the power into Lot's hands, and Lot leaves. And I don't think it's because Abram doesn't believe that Lot's a part of the plan anymore. I think he's just trusting if Lot is a part of the plan, then the Lord's going to return Lot to him, right? He's trusting that if I hold this thing too tightly, I'm going to mess it up anyway. So I think he's willing to pivot the plan. I think that's something good that we can all learn from. But then there's this subplot here developed with Sodom. You're going to hear this a lot through the rest of the sermon. There may be some foreshadowing going on here because it says that he pitched his tents and camps near Sodom. And then it reminds us Sodom is a bad place. You biblical scholars may already know that Sodom ends up being a pretty gnarly place to be. And it's interesting that he doesn't want to live in Sodom, right? He's still pitching his tent. He's still camping the way that Abram used to do, but he's making sure he's camping near Sodom. He picks up his tent and, I'm still camping, don't worry, but he moves it 30 feet over and tends to get, he wants to be near Sodom for some reason. And I think that we do the same thing, don't we? I know I do the same thing, that we will have a bad idea that we're not going to camp in, we're not going to move in. I don't want to have an apartment in my Sodom, but I also don't want to be so far away that I can't check it out once in a while, Like I can't just be like, how's Sodom doing? Just kind of glance over there at it. I've got 100 examples I could do for this, but I'll give you one that involves an app on my phone. I won't tell you what app because I want it to be a little ambiguous. For you, it could be something different. For you, it could be Facebook or Instagram or Zillow. I don't know what kind of apps you're getting in trouble on. But for me, there was this app, and the people on this app speak pretty unkindly to one another. And sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's in good fun, and sometimes it's really mean and ugly. In fact, I had a friend that I thought would enjoy this app. I was like, hey, man, are you on there? And he was like, no. He said, I can't, man. He said, I end up looking at things I shouldn't look at. I end up saying things I don't want to say. I end up hurting people that I care about. He said, so I'm not on that app. And you know what I thought? What a lightweight. What a bad Christian that he can't just hang out and have this app on his phone. And I can't believe he's not strong enough to have this app and keep from being a bad guy. What a wuss, I can have this app on my phone and still be a good person. Well, spoiler alert, no, I can't. So a couple years later, actually, I was still on this app quite a bit, and I really enjoyed it, especially whenever COVID hit and we were all staring at our phones nonstop. I was on this app probably even more than usual, right? And looking back now, I see this was kind of a Sodom for me, and I was camping near it. I could quit anytime I want, right? Isn't that what we say about our Sodoms? This thing has no control over me. I had a buddy, this is very trivial, but a buddy came to me and told me something about his new Nike shoes that he had, a very, very close friend of mine. I had seen something on this app that was ugly about Nike, and before I even knew it, out of my mouth came this ugly thing about Nikes. I own Nikes, right? What am I doing? But I said this ugly thing about him really just to hurt him. Guess what? It worked. It hurt him bad. He was trying to show me something he was proud of, and because of the things that I had seen and heard, the way people talk about on this app, all of a sudden I spewed out this really hateful thing to him, and I've apologized, and I think we're as good as we're going to be, but we've never been the same since the day I said that to him about his shoes. Is it silly? Is it stupid? Maybe, but it was so hurtful and hateful that our relationship has never been able to be the same. Because I was choosing to camp near some Sodom in my life, some thing that I don't want to live there. This isn't my whole being, but I also don't want to be so far away that I can't just check in and be like, hey, what are they doing on that app? What kind of stuff are they saying over there, There's funny memes on there, right? How am I going to get memes? It's the only place on the internet that has memes, I'm like, what can I? And because I choose to stay near to that place, it actually didn't hurt anybody for a long time, but eventually it did. It hurt me, and it hurt somebody that I cared about because I wouldn't just get away from that thing. I wanted to stay near it. And so for you, maybe it's an app for you, or maybe it's a specific group of friends. Maybe it's a workplace relationship that's outside of your marriage that's getting a little bit too intimate. Maybe it's the way that these people speak or this certain show that you watch. I'm not saying any show is sinful, but if it's sinful for you, then get away from it, right? As many people as there are in here, that's how many different Sodoms that each one of us have to try to get away from instead of trying to camp near. You can be like, no, it doesn't have any power over me, but I sure do like to camp near it. I sure do like to be right over here where I can glance over and see what's happening over there. I'm spending my time over here, but I'm glancing over there. If we actually intend to avoid sin, then we can't camp near the thing that's going to draw us into sin. We can't live where it lives. In fact, we can't even live while it lives. Paul's talking to the church in the New Testament over in Colossians 3:5, and this is what he tells us about this. He says, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. And then he gives us a list: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is adultery. That may not be a whole list, but that's a pretty good list of things that we find ourselves just wanting to look over and check out, isn't it? I don't want to live there. I'm not an idolater, But I like to look over at the idols and just see what they're up to, right? Even Jesus himself, he said, if your right eye causes you to sin, stab it out. We don't have a lot of blind Christians walking around because I don't think it's a literal thing. I think he's trying to say, if there's something in your life that causes you to sin, put it to death, get away from it, don't camp near it. It's going to hurt you, and even probably more importantly, it's going to hurt somebody that you care about, oftentimes in an irreparable way. Get away from it. There's going to be a lot more on Sodom, even in the very next chapter, but we got to finish chapter 13 before we get there. So let's get back to here. Verse 14 of chapter 13 in Genesis says, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, look around from where you are to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. So here we see he just trusted God with Lot, and God doubles up on his promise. Hey, your descendants are still going to number like the sand and the dust. And so it finishes here in chapter 13. So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. Still building tents and altars, right? He trusted God concerning his plan with Lot. He still doesn't know exactly how it's going to happen, but he lets Lot go, and God doubles down on his promise. And so Abram builds an altar. Things are going well for him, right? Well, Genesis 14 is a pretty cool thing. We're not going to read a lot of it. I suggest you go back and read it later. There's a lot of names in here that I'm about to butcher. But let's pick it up in verse 1, and let me tell you why I think this is a cool chapter. It says this: at the time when Amraphel, that's the hardest one. When Amraphel was king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, I got that one, I studied that one, king of Elam, and Tidal, it's a cool name, king of Goyim. These kings went to war against, here's another list of kings, Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemember, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, of course, as you well know. All these latter kings joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Dead Sea Valley. For 12 years, they had been subject to Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year, they rebelled. It's a bunch of names and a bunch of places. I don't know where they are. I don't know how to pronounce them. This is kind of like if you don't watch Game of Thrones and someone's explaining it to you, you're like, I don't know, and I kind of don't care. Like, who are the Lannisters and why do they pay their debts? Like, what's going on here? This is kind of what's going on here. Like, there's a whole bunch of people, and it's kind of too much to remember. So I'm going to kind of give you the Wopsle recap here, and it explains some of the tactics and some war stuff that we're going to skip right over. So let me tell you kind of how this is important for our discussion today. So there's two sides to this war. This side over here has Sodom and Gomorrah and their kings, and there's several different people together, but the important parts are Sodom and Gomorrah are part of this. And then there's King Kedorlaomer and all of his crew over here, and they're fighting. And they had been kind of ruling over everybody for a long time. It says, 12 years, right? So in the 13th year, Sodom and Gomorrah and all their kings were like, it's time to fight back. And so they take it to, and there's this big clash between the two sides. The king of Sodom and Kedorlaomer and all of their little croonies, and they're going and they fight. And then guess what? King Kedorlaomer comes out on top, squashes them all. And so guess what? Whenever a king conquers all these different lands, he gets to take all of their stuff. Check this out in verse 11. It says this: the four kings, talking about Kedorlaomer's side now, seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food. Then they went away. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom. See? Would you look at that? Remember, he wasn't living in Sodom, was he? He was just camping near Sodom. He was just hanging out close to Sodom. But now here in this chapter, he was living in Sodom. It wasn't his plan, but that's where he found himself, wasn't it? Again, I can look back on so many areas of my life where it wasn't my plan, but it's sure where I found myself. I didn't wake up and say, hey, I'd love to get in this huge mess. That would be awesome for me and my family and my life. No, but there's been days when I woke up and looked around and said, what did I do? What happened? Like, it was so subtle. And now I live here. So Lot lived in Sodom at this point. Therefore, now Sodom's over here, he lived in Sodom, and now because of King Kedorlaomer taking everything, now Lot has been captured and taken by King Kedorlaomer. He is his possession, along with everything else. It all belongs to him. Well, Abram gets word from a guy that this war has happened and that Lot was taken. So he gets an army and he goes to war against King Chedorlaomer. It's a small army. I don't know how he did it, but it's probably a really cool story. And he actually defeats Chedorlaomer. So because King Chedorlaomer had defeated Sodom and Gomorrah, King Chedorlaomer had all of their stuff and all of his stuff. So now Abram beats him. So now he has all of everybody's stuff, right? He's got everything. Everything at his disposal, and he's powerful, and he was already rich. Now he's even richer. He's got everything that he wants. Everything that he needs. Let's see how this wraps up in verse 21. We'll finish up chapter 14 here. It says, the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the people and keep the goods for yourself. Well, what's the whole reason that he's even here fighting this war? It's because of the people. Not only the people, it was because of a person. Out of all this stuff, he didn't even want lots of people. He fought this whole thing because he wanted one thing. He wanted Lot. And then what's the one thing that the king says he wants back? The people, including Lot. Again, we see over and over Abram having a pretty good plan and then it not going the way he thought it would be. Verse 22, but it says, but Abram said to the king of Sodom, with raised hand I have sworn an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or a strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abram rich. I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten, and the share that belonged to the men who went with me to Anar, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share. So right, like we see here, like good for Abram. He says, I want nothing to do with you, Sodom. I know you're offering me these riches, and sometimes we can be like, well, couldn't he have at least taken the money and done something good with it? Like, no. When something is a bad idea, everything connected with it is a bad idea. And he knows what Sodom is about, and he says, I'm not going to camp near you. I'm not going to live near you. I'm not going to take anything from you. Even though, again, it's his stuff. He could have said, I'm going to keep Lot, but I'm giving you everything else. He said, no. Everything that belongs to Sodom, if King of Sodom wants to keep it, I'm going to let him keep it. And here he went to get Lot, defeated this King Chedorlaomer in an epic way, has Lot in his possession, and once again is invited to let him go. And he does. He trusts God in chapter 14 the same way he did in chapter 13, saying, no, I thought I had this plan. I have to believe him going to war thinking, oh, this is how God's going to do it, right? I'm going to fight this battle. Lot's going to come back to me. Then he's going to be my heir just the way that I thought. And it didn't go just the way that he thought. Instead, he trusts God again by letting Lot go. So good for Abram that he won't have anything to do with Sodom. He doesn't want to camp near. He doesn't want to glance over and see what they're doing. He says, I don't want anything from you. Take your stuff. Take Lot. And Abram goes back. And you may say, maybe Lot went with him. No, the next time we see Lot, he's at the city gates of Sodom, right before some bad stuff's about to go down. You want to talk about camping near Sodom and hurting someone that you care about? Lot's wife is going to lose her life because he's camping near Sodom, because he's living in Sodom. So we know that Lot camped there. Then we know that he moved in there, and we know that he stayed there when he could have left, and we know that he stays there for a long time, and it ends really badly for him and his family. And so today as we wrap up, I just want to kind of invite you to do a little introspection. If you feel like you're like Lot today, is there some kind of Sodom in your life, some kind of thing, some kind of place, some kind of group of people, some kind of perpetual sin that you're not like living in, but that you don't want to be too far away from either? And maybe you're like me and you think, well, I'm not such a lightweight Christian that I can't be near this sin. I'm fine. Well, we're always all fine, aren't we, right? Until we're not. And the bad thing about when we're not fine is it usually ends up hurting somebody that we care about. So I encourage you, if that's you, don't stay near it. Delete the app, right? Sever the relationship. Maybe have a tough conversation, or maybe just don't. Maybe just stop conversations all together. I don't know what it's going to look like for you to get away from that Sodom, but I think we can all learn. It went poorly for Lot. Let's not let it go poorly for us. And if you're like Abraham, I still do have a bit of encouragement for you. Maybe you feel like you're trusting the Lord and you've continually kind of taken your plans and open-handedly put them before God and been like, do what you need, God. I trust you. My plans seem pretty good, but if you have different plans, they're probably better, so let's go for it. Maybe that's you. Then I ask you, though, what we see Abram do over and over and over is he keeps on building altars. He keeps on showing the world what God's doing in his life. And so if God has been so faithful to you and blessed you so much, and you're just keeping that all for yourself, and you're like, I'm pretty cool. That's true that you are, but remember we saw back in Genesis 12, God's blessing Abram. Why? Because through Abraham, he's going to bless the world. God's blessings for Abram aren't for Abram. They're for everybody else. And I think the same is true for us. God's blessings for you, they are for you. They are awesome. Lean into them, but they are for the world through you. So if you're receiving blessings, if you're trusting the Lord, if you're open-handed with your plans and looking to move where God tells you to move, that's awesome. But what could you do to help the world know that more and more? Can you build some kind of altar? Can you make a Facebook post, right? If you hadn't deleted it yet after that first half of that sermon, maybe you're still on it. Maybe you say something that the Lord's done. I know that can show people what's going on. Maybe you invite someone to coffee just to say, hey, this is what God's doing in my life. Maybe you tell your family more clearly something that God is doing. I don't know what it is for you, but if you feel like Lot today, get away from that Sodom. It's not good for you. It's going to hurt somebody you care about. And if you feel like Abram today, make sure that the world knows the good that God is doing in your life. I'll say again, next week in chapter 15, we're really going to get into God's promises and how we can hold on to them in a good way, which is the story of our church in a big way. So I'm going to read that chapter 15. We're just going to be right in chapter 15 next week. You can get there. But for today, let's reflect on Lot and Abram as I close with some prayer. God, we do come to you from all different places in our walks with you today. Some of us may be more like Lot and near a bad decision, and some of us be more like Abram and building altars to you, God. And the truth is, most of us probably fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, doing our best and messing up sometimes and looking good some days and bad others, God. So we just pray that as your grace comes in and reminds us that we are loved just the way we are, it would also compel us to take another next step into the life that you've called us to. God, help us first of all to be a person whose heart is in love with you, who seeks you first before anything else in our life, God. And then secondly, let us be a people that as your love fills us up, it splashes over to everybody that we come in contact with. God, help us be a force for good and help us take the blessings that you've put into our lives and realize that it's our task then is to show the world a blessing because of that, God. Help us to reflect the good that you show us in a way where people look at us and they see you. God, help us flee from our bad ideas. Help us give you glory for the areas that you're faithful. And help us to walk the path that you've called us to. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.